Hey everyone. So I wanted to make some videos. I know a lot of you asked for more help with Blender or hadn't used it, been used Maya previously, or maybe hadn't used a 3D modeling program. So I wanted to kind of make this very introductory video on how to use Blender, what the different parts are, what you're kind of doing, and what your goals might be for this class within this program, and put it out there for you guys to use. So again, this video is going to be really basic, and I'll talk more about editing an object and maybe some animation stuff later on. But just to kind of get you started, I wanted to familiarize you with Blender as a software. So first of all, Blender is free to download. You can go to the website, and it's very straightforward to download and then open up. And once you do, you're going to see it something like this. So if you have projects that you've worked on in the past, they'll be right here, and you can open them up here. But for now, when you're just starting with like a new blank scene, just go ahead and click off of this. Now, I'm going to turn this on here, which you don't have or shouldn't be doing. This is just for me it's huge, let's make it 50, to show you what I'm doing as I'm working on things. So this should be helpful to you in that you'll be able to see like when my mouse clicks here, or if I press a button there, it'll show you down here what I'm doing. So hopefully that'll just be helpful to you. I'm going to go ahead and make this full screen. All right, cool. So the first thing I want to go over is just kind of what is happening here. This screen is a lot. There's a lot of stuff going on. Actually, what we have is 4 different panels currently. This panel here is the screen view. This panel here is currently a timeline. Here we have a properties panel, and up here we have our hierarchy. And so I'll go through all of those 4 different panels and explain what they do, as well as talking a little bit about other options and the basics of navigation and whatnot. So let's start in this main panel here. This is the scene view. One note about our panels is that they can be changed. So we're on the default layout. You can change the layouts here. Default's probably good for now. And also within the panels, at the bottom left-hand corner or top left-hand corner up here and here, you see this drop down. And those gives you the options for what type of panel. So here we're in the 3D view panel. If we change it to the timeline, which is what we have down here, you can see by the icon, it looks the same here. So you can kind of rearrange how you want your panels laid out. Anyway, not super important for right now. Let's go ahead and talk about the scene view. So this is going to be a hugely important part of your scene that you're working on, is actually visualizing the scene and seeing what's in it and being able to navigate around and choose things within the 3D scene. So let's actually start there and start with how to navigate in this 3D space. There are 3 ways of doing it. You can rotate, you can pan, and you can zoom in and out. So first, if you are using a laptop, if you have a trackpad and you do not have a mouse, go ahead and follow me here, and we're going to go to File, go to User Preferences, and then go make sure you're on this Input section here, and then go ahead and click Emulate 3 Mouse button and Emulate Numpad. What those are going to do is that's going to make your trackpad allow you to do the same things that a mouse would do, and understanding that you don't have a mouse. So I'll go ahead, and when I'm talking, I'll try to give the instructions for mouse and for trackpad for these 3 things. So just to move around the scene, this is called tumbling or just rotating. Go ahead and, if you're using a trackpad, put your 2 fingers down and just move them around the trackpad together, and that'll help you rotate around. If you are on a mouse, I believe it's right click and drag in order to do the same thing. Now, zooming in and out is still 2 fingers on a trackpad, but it's going to be 2 fingers going out together and apart, just exactly the same way you would zoom in and out on a lot of different devices. 2 fingers together, or 2 fingers apart to zoom in, and then 2 fingers together to zoom back out. And if you're on a mouse, that's just going to be middle wheel scrolling. And then finally, if you want to pan, you're going to press Shift and Alt and then drag. And a middle mouse button, as you can see, that's the middle, on a mouse, that's the middle mouse button and drag. But on a laptop, again, it's Shift Alt or Shift Option and then drag. And that lets you just pan around the scene, which means to move it, like just push it around. So with all of those 3 things, you should be able to negotiate your way around this space fairly easily. You can, zoom in on a cube and kind of pan to center it and then rotate around it to see what's up. And that should help you kind of understand how to move around the scene. As far as what we find in this default scene, it's always going to be the same when Blender starts a new scene, and it's always going to have this cube in the middle, a light source, and a camera. Don't worry too much about the light in the camera for right now, because when you're using Blender with Unity, what matters is the object. You want to export this object into Unity where you're going to have a different camera and a different light source. So you don't really have to worry too much about positioning the light in camera. If you did want to render your own images in Blender, that's when the light in the camera would come into play, but like for now, not really relevant to this course. We are mostly working with the objects themselves, and this cube is an example of an object that you might have and be working with. So when we have objects, one of the basic things we're going to want to do with them is move them around and change their shape. I'll go into more specifics on how to change their shape later, but the big three things are translate, rotate, and scale. Right now, we're automatically given the option to translate, and that's what these arrows are here. So if you drag the red arrow, you're translating along the x-axis. The green arrow translates around the y-axis, and the blue arrow translates around the z-axis. You can tell both because of the directions they're pointing, but also because, as we see in this corner, it's always going to be red is x, green is y, blue is z. Is always going to be the color coordination between those three axes. So let's go ahead and Control Z, put that back in the middle. Now let's say you want to rotate. Well, you change the tools down here. These are your options, these three here. This is translate, rotate, and scale. When you turn it to rotate, you'll see these circles around your object. And you can drag on these circles. If you click any of these circles and drag on them, you're rotating around the relevant axis. So again, red is x, so we're rotating around the x-axis. Green is y, we're rotating around the y-axis, and blue is z, and we're rotating around the z-axis. You can also tell by the way that the circles are facing and see that like the direction of the circle is the way that you would be rotating it. If you want to rotate around all axes together, you can go ahead and use this white one, and that's kind of like this free form that rotates around where the camera perspective is. Alright, so that's rotate, and then the last one here is scale. So when we click this one, we have the same options again: scale along the y-axis, scale along the x-axis, and scale along the z-axis using these three handlebars. So I'm going to go ahead and Control Z until that cube is back in the center where it started. And then go back here to change it back to translate. Remember, translate, rotate, scale. And so yeah, you can see our cube is back to how it started. Another hotkey is S. S scales the whole thing. So if you press S, you can just move in and out. And then you can also specify an axis. So if you press S and then X, you're scaling along the x-axis. Change it to y, you're scaling along the y-axis. Z, you're scaling along the z-axis. So S is the hotkey for scaling. I believe that G is the hotkey for translating. Yep, there we go. And no, R doesn't do anything. Okay, never mind. S and G for translate and scale. And then, yeah, and so you do that. And then also note when you press scale, you can also press a number like 2, and it'll scale it by 2. And just click to cement that. And if you look in this area right here, as I do that, so like watch this space right here, S2, you see the numbers there, 2.5 or 5.6, whatever that's, I did 1 over because I pressed the divide, 1 over 5.6. You can also do like X3 and it'll show you that it's doing, it'll do X3, scale X by 3. So that's like a way to do it very quantitatively, if that's easy for you. All right, going back to how it was. All right, so we have talked about how to navigate your way around here and how to change the thing of objects. Oh, one last thing. If you click, that moves your 3D cursor, and we'll talk more about what your 3D cursor does later. It has a lot of different functionality. And then if you right-click on something, you select it. Right-click is select. Left-click is moving the 3D cursor. And if you press B, you can select a group of things. B and drag selects a group of things. All right, so those are the main functionalities that I wanted to get to around the scene view. Within the scene view, we have the side panel, and you can open and close this by pressing T, but this also allows you to do some of those same things just in a different way. So for example, once this cube is selected, you can go ahead and click Translate to move it here, click Rotate to go ahead and rotate it, and it's the same thing where if you press like X, you specify the axis, whatever, and then Scale to scale it. And so if working in here doesn't work for you and rather like click a physical button, you have these options here. This is within the tools panel, the tool shelf of this panel. You can also go down to create, And then this is how you add new shapes to your scene. So if you click, your 3D cursor is where that object is going to show up. So let's say we want to add a cylinder to this place. You just click cylinder and a cylinder will appear. Let's click sphere. We have a sphere appearing, all this sort of good stuff. Here are the options: cone. You can also add in lights here or other objects such as text or a camera, and then armature is something that we're going to look at later when we work with animation. But this create panel is where you add things in. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of all those shapes, go back to our cube in the middle, and that's pretty much all you're going to need off of this side panel for right now. There is other stuff. If you watch a tutorial that shows you how to do something over here, feel free to go ahead and do it. Definitely explore, but for as far as what you need basics-wise, that's going to be everything out of this panel that's necessary. Now let's look quickly down at this bar right here. This is still within the scene graph editor. This is how we go switch from the two main ones that we're going to want to use are object mode and edit mode. Edit mode, which we'll talk about in a later video, means that whatever object is selected, we're now editing, and we are going to edit the vertices and the edges and the faces on that object, but we can't select any other objects or work with any other objects while we're in edit mode for whatever we have selected. So object mode is switching between objects and moving objects in relation to each other, and then edit mode is working with one object specifically in a much more detailed way. So object mode is probably going to be where you are for this tutorial. This thing right next to it determines how we display our scene. So right now what we're seeing all of the objects in their most basic form. Let's say we add materials to objects. That's not going to show up here. In order for that to show up, we have to go to this material view. And that shows us what materials we have on the objects. For example, this cube is just gray right now. And the reason that it's black on this side is because we're seeing how it's affected by the light, which is just kind of shining down from above it and on this side. So we have a material view. Rendered shows it actually live renders the scene. This isn't going to be super necessary, but it'll help you kind of understand what your materials look like. Going back to solid. And then the last one that's pretty important, especially for editing the object, is wireframe, which kind of just shows the edges of the object without showing the middle. So those are different views. Again, not hugely important for this, for like the absolute basics, and we'll get into why you would want to use these different ones more often later, but for now, just keep it with the solid, and you'll see the scene very simply. And those are the basic things for down here that I want to go over now. The rest of it don't really stress too much about. It's just these two drop downs, and of course these translate, rotate, scale icons that I showed you earlier. This part down here we're not going to do anything with right now, don't worry about it. A lot of times when we switch to different panels, like when we need different things to come up, we'll change this bottom part to, let's say, the UV image editor or the node editor, depending on how we need it, but for now we're not going to talk about that. The timeline's not super necessary. And then over here, okay, so hierarchy, huge, super important, really great, just basically is a list of all the things that are in your scene, and when you click on them, you can select them. You also, if you like are creating a scene with a lot of stuff, you can rename things here. So for example, this cube, maybe we don't want to call it cube if we're actually having it be a treasure chest. So you can go ahead and double click on that and just say like treasure or whatever name is more apparent here, to like make sure that you have a good idea of what actually is in your scene. You can also click this eye to make it visible and invisible. This is really big if you're like working on objects and they're all blocking each other. For your help while you're editing, you can go ahead and make anything invisible that you're not directly working with. All right, so lastly, and this is the bulk of where all the stuff is this properties panel right here. There's most of these different options we're not going to work at. Each of these is a different tab. This is the rendering tab. Again, we're not really going to be rendering in Blender, so not important. I would say the most important one here is this object tab. So this is the little box that you see right here. Go ahead and click on that. And what you're going to see here is the location, rotation, and scale of objects again. So for example, let's select this box. Let's say that we want to make this box 5 times as big. We can go ahead and just change the scale to 5, 5, 5. And that's a lot easier than doing it manually to make it very crisp and clean and exactly the numbers that you want it to be. If you ever want to center an object, go ahead and change your location to 0, 0, 0. You can rotate it by 45 degrees super easily. This is like a very clean way to do your transformations. And then other basics here is where we have a lot of modifiers. You might see these in a lot of tutorials, and we can talk a little bit more about them later. This is materials panel. Again, we'll talk about it later to kind of help you out with that. But yeah, this is the most basic of all of them, and this is really the groundwork of what you need to understand to do Blender. And I'm going to go ahead and put this back to not rotated and just normal sized, so you can see back to where the cube started. And that's, again, the basics of Blender. Hopefully that makes you feel comfortable in this environment, and then when I do next tutorials and kind of show you how specifically to edit objects or how specifically to add materials or do animation, you feel comfortable at least working within this space. And similarly, when you watch tutorials online, they feel more comfortable to you. All right, well, I hope that was helpful, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.